Okay, welcome to this presentation around precision teaching. My name is Nazam Hussain. I'm an educational psychologist. So the aims of this short bite-sized training are to become familiar with the key principles of precision teaching. So what is it? Essentially, precision teaching isn't a prescriptive method of what teaching pedagogy you use. It's more about a method which allows you to assess, monitor a child's performance alongside specific discrete skills with the aim of developing fluency for those skills. And some of the most common kind of areas that schools tackle are around single word reading or spelling, number recognition, maths facts, something around phonics, just those discrete tasks that you want to develop fluency in. It can really be applied to any subject which requires learning factual information. Why is it useful? So obviously we'll talk about the process after a few slides, but essentially once you set it up, it can be a fairly quick intervention, which is very bespoke and specific to that child. It uses learning hierarchy frameworks to develop accuracy and fluency of skills, discrete tasks that you want the students to embed and use really, really quickly. The students get immediate feedback about teaching. It is evidence-based, so there's good evidence for its impact on those discrete skills, and also extremely motivating for the child in the way that it's presented, because it shows progress to their relative starting point. And it's a short daily intervention that can be fitted in to whatever the timetable is for the school. So when do you actually decide to use precision teaching? It's usually when learning is not happening despite, or learning progress is not happening despite good teaching and some old group support. There's something that's stopping that child making progress. There's a pre-skill that hasn't developed to a sufficient level that allows further skills to be built up or further bits of knowledge to be built up. It's when a student finds it really difficult to retain or remember information, or they might be lacking in confidence and motivation, particularly through kind of past perception of failure, or where there's some real clear gaps in learning. A good model to think about learning skills is the Herring and Eaton model. And they said essentially whatever skill you learn, you go through these phases here, initially around acquisition, then fluency, maintenance of those skills, and then you generalize those skills and then you adapt them. So think about them in more creative ways. So in the initial acquisition phase, you need adults to model things for you. You need excessive kind of labeling of the concepts. You might need a lot of practice of the sub-skills that you're trying to learn. Fluency is when you get on to more speed and accuracy. Maintenance is where, after a point in time, you're able to demonstrate those skills at an independent level. Generalization is when you're transferring those skills between different contexts. And adaptation is when you use those skills and knowledge in very creative kind of ways. Essentially, precision teaching really tackles fluency. So it tackles skills at that fluency level, which is speed and accuracy. So how quickly do you, it's not whether you know your letter sounds, but how quickly do you know them? Do you know 50 in a minute? How quickly can you know your number bonds to 10 or number bonds to 100? So it's really important to look at those concepts or skills which can almost create a ceiling for a learner, and how quickly can you develop those really, really quickly. Now, a step-by-step guide will be available on the full training. Now, essentially, step one is when you decide, when you assess a pupil or a child, and you decide on what their learning targets are going to be. So you might be in consultation between a class teacher or a teaching assistant and a Senko. You decide which area you want to focus on. So it might be number bonds to 10. It might be recognition of three-digit numbers. It might be spelling the high frequency words. It might be knowing what certain bits of vocabulary means in year 5. And then you establish a bit of a baseline and also an aim rate. Again, in the full training, we'll talk a lot about what is an appropriate aim rate depending on what skill you're developing, whether it's handwriting or spellings or reading or labeling. Then you create something called a probe sheet. Essentially, a probe sheet is the actual sheet that you use for the testing phase. So if you are tackling high frequency words, you might create a probe sheet where you test those particular identified high frequency words. Step 3 is you decide on the teaching methods and select the resources. Again, the precision teaching is not prescriptive about what methods you use. It's essentially more about monitoring and assessing progress along these discrete skills. And the daily routine in step 4 of precision teaching is always going to follow a structure where you teach for 5 to 10 minutes, you assess for 1 minute only, you score the correct and incorrect answers, and then you chart that progress on a ratio chart. And step 5 is when you interpret the results and you monitor the progress. We're going to go back towards those steps again. So the step 1, decide which specific skills you want the child to acquire. So before you start a precision teaching program, it's always good to have a child and a skill in mind. It might be recognizing the first high frequency words. It might be the 8 times table. It might be the capital cities. Focus on a few items at a time, because again, you're focusing on speed and accuracy. Decide on how to teach that skill, and this will be a combination of concrete resources or repetitive kind of methods or exposure to a concept in different areas. But make sure whatever teaching you do matches the probe sheet, it matches the assessment. Now, in the full training, we'll talk about how to create a probe sheet where each item is repeated at random. You wouldn't have to do this by hand. There's a really good package that you can use. And then don't forget to make your own answer sheet as well, because a child might be starting at the top left-hand corner, and in a minute they have to identify, it might be numbers, it might be spelling, it might be letters, as much as they can do in 1 minute. And if they get to the bottom right-hand corner, they start from the top again, and you're timing them. You're timing how many correct they get and how many errors they might make. And where do you record this? You record it on a chart called a ratio chart. I'm going to explain what that is in the next few slides. But essentially, you fill in, obviously, the name, the class, what targets you might be working on, and then you plot the scores on this graph by using how you recorded, how many correct or incorrect answers were given in a minute using the probe sheet. So on a daily basis, when you're looking at one of those steps that we discussed earlier, where you teach, you test, you score, and then you chart. So teach 5 to 10 minutes a day. This is once you've identified the discrete skills that you're looking at, ensuring that the teaching methods are a good match for the probe. And being really careful with that. If you're testing high frequency word recognition, do not focus on the child being able to spell the words. Then you test for 1 minute only, you time it. You focus on speed and accuracy, and you keep a record of the incorrect and the correct scores on your version of the probe, and then you record that in the ratio chart at the bottom. Now, the next bit is, once you've recorded the ratio or the scores at the bottom, you need to chart them on this graph here. So you record the daily results, and then you record them on this chart. So these are the number correct from day to day, and these are the errors that that student made day to day. And these are the discrete skills that they were working on. And you join up any continuous data. So if a child's absent, join up those points, just put a little black line that you've got there. Share the chart with the child, because it can be really empowering for the child, because they're looking at their progress from day to day. They're not being compared to their peers. They're not being compared to age-related expectations. They're looking at their own personal best, beating their goal from yesterday or last week or from 3 weeks ago if you go back to earlier discrete targets that you had. Now, I'm going to bring this up here. So this is the ratio chart. And if you look at the left-hand side, the y-axis, you'll notice that it goes up in really kind of funny patterns. So it goes from 1 to 2, 3, 4. And it looks as if the increments are unevenly distributed if you look at the numbers, but they are. That's because they are. But if you look at it carefully, the distance is a ratio chart, a ratio of 2 to 1. So if you look at the distance between 1 and 2, and 2 and 4, and 4 and 8, they're equal. If you look at the distance between 3 and 6, and 20 and 40, they're equal. There's where you put down your daily correct and incorrect scores, and this is where you would plot it. And there are the days of the week. Let's see an example. So we've got a student called Jack. And now, so we've got a student called Jack. There's the teacher's name, and this is the target there. 4 times tables up to 6. And we know that on the first day, Jack scored 10 correct and made 4 errors. And that's plotted there and there, and so on and so forth. And this is the record that was made along this discrete A target. Then on, must have been 2.5 weeks later, the student targeted their 4 times tables up to 12. So again, we've got plots there, and then that's been plotted here. And Jack was not absent, but if they were absent, we might have to put a line across. And then I'll just change the color. On C, it was 4 times tables, but mixed. And you can tell actually it made kind of slightly less progress there in terms of speed, but that's because the task was a bit harder. And this quickly allows you, if I change the color again, this quickly allows you to see which kind of direction the student's going. So again, we're kind of going in the right directions there. Accuracy is going up, number of errors are going down on average, slightly slower rate there, but then the task was harder. So it gives you quite a rich picture to work on. If a child was away, we do not join up that data, we just put a black line down, and then we wouldn't join up those points there. Okay, take that off. Why do we use this funny graph? So you've got Bill and Ben here, and it looks as if Ben is making some accelerated progress. Ben is, and Bill is kind of languishing down below. But if you plot the exact same results in a ratio chart, you will see that they're both making the same rate of progress. Again, this is slightly unrealistic numbers. It's just there to demonstrate why a ratio chart is useful, especially for those kids who find some aspects of learning really difficult. So I hope that's given you a brief overview of the key principles of precision teaching. Now, in the full training, you'll get a full step-by-step guide on how to implement that. We will have a practice of using the precision teaching approach. I will demonstrate how to develop a probe sheet, how to record results on a ratio chart. We will think about how to interpret and what kind of decisions to make based on the data that's in front of you, and also how to not only carry out those discrete skills, but ensure that those skills are transferred into everyday classroom context. So if you're doing spellings, how do we make sure that those are being used accurately in any independent writing task? Please sign up for Skills for Bradford if you're interested in taking part in the full training. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop there now. Okay.